Well, on this episode today, I tell a few amusing stories of intuition, also known as gut feeling, that I think are pretty appropriate to the world we live in now. And then we get into another Priscilla Barnes review with her appearance on the classic detective show Starsky and Hutch, that also happened to air like a lot of her other works in 1978. So stay tuned, you're going to really enjoy it. Well, hello once again, and welcome to Frank Weber's Party. I'm your host, Frank Weber. So glad that you could join me once again this week. Hope you're getting a lot out of the podcast, telling your family and friends, of course, about me, and hitting subscribe, doing all those things that all the podcasters want you to do. Got a great show for you today. I try to think of some other topic to talk about before I get into my review of the week, and sometimes it's very difficult. I get tempted to want to discuss something kind of deep and heavy, pretty controversial, even though I said before that I didn't want to do that just yet on this show, but I may in the future. It could be politics, could be religion, could be social issues, but I really wanted to talk about today was something called intuition, or the gut feeling, and what that is and what it isn't, and how it applies to our lives right now. I may have mentioned one time before that in another 13 months or so, we have another presidential election coming up in this country, the United States, and I'm not looking forward to it. It used to be kind of fun, but after the last election, it's just not like that anymore. Very draining. Very concerning about which direction we're going in and all that. And so, if you have a candidate on the screen, whether it's in a debate or some other campaign speech, and he looks directly at the camera and basically lies to the camera, you have to know that and use your intuition to know that, along with doing your research and other things that you should be doing as a responsible citizen. I don't want to get too deep and heavy in it right now. I actually want to tell a few stories. It's true that women have very deep, very developed intuitions, and they use them a lot. Men also have them, but we don't use them as much, and we don't really tend to develop them. I've had mine from a very young age, but it's really only gotten wise in the last few years. I mean, it's taken a long time to really get life experience. And that with an intuition is really good. It makes you really discerning. Let me just go ahead and give a few examples of stories, some of which I think are very funny, and I really believe that you'll enjoy. So in the early 80s, my brother and I were very young, and we live in Austin, and Dad won an Atari 2600, which I can't remember if I've talked about this story on the show or not, but I'm probably not more than 4 or 5. My brother, he may be 2 or 3 at the time. My wife, by the way, hates it when I tell this story, but that's probably why I should tell it right. I mean, that's why it's fun and it's informative and it's funny. You know, I had my real grandfather and a step grandmother, and we thought they were pretty good, good typical grandparents, loved us and maybe spoiled us just a little bit. My dad's side, the only one who was living at that point was my grandma. She came from a different background, different time, different location. So I don't know if she really appreciated everything that we had in the early 80s. They didn't have those in the 20s or 30s when actually you have the Depression and everything. But we figured grandparents are supposed to spoil you. So Grandma came over to the house one time in Austin, and we said, "We have something to show you, Grandma. We'd really love you to come watch us play our new Atari and video games. And we didn't actually tell her that, actually, the way it goes now. I'm telling it wrong, but we started walking that direction. And before we even get to the living room, she says, "No, there's no way I'm going to watch you play those video games. I think those things are garbage." And, she didn't say bullshit or anything like that, but she might as well have said that. And it really took me aback, really, because this is my grandma. She loves us. The relationship with grandparents and grandkids is pretty special. Some people think it's more spoiling than the relationship between parents and kids. So I was really shocked that she had that kind of reaction. I thought she was going to go in there and watch us and humor us for a few minutes and go, "Oh, that's really nice, Frank and Tom. That's wonderful." And, just be there for us for 5 or 10 minutes, humor us, and then she can go back and do what she wants to do in the kitchen or wherever. But then she actively fought us. And that was the first time in my life that I realized that this world is not quite a perfect, predictable place. I mean, it's actually off a lot. And my gut feeling at that point, it was there when I was a little kid. And I'm like, this is not right. What the hell is going on here? Yes, she was a different person, different time and place and all that. So that's kind of where it started at a young age. And like I said, it was just one of those differences between us, I suppose. But, a few years later, this kind of involves my grandma, but we would go down to the farm east of San Antonio where my grandma lived. And this was after my dad and mom divorced. And Dad wound up moving down to the farm for a year or two. It seemed like a real step backwards for him, going back to the place where he grew up and not really moving forward. And it was probably a financial decision. But I also remember he and my uncle, who lived there full time, I never really completely understood my uncle's story. He did kind of blue collar work and everything, and then lived at home with his mom. I don't know what the deal was. He was definitely black sheep of the family. I'm like 10 years old or something. Tom's 2 years younger than me, my brother. My dad and Uncle Lee J, as his name was, they would get into arguments occasionally, usually over stupid stuff. And a lot of it was driven on Lee J's side. He wound up getting drunk, drinking Pearl Light. And especially on a hot day, and he would drink a lot of it. And you may be wondering, because I'm just realizing this myself, it's pretty difficult to get drunk on Pearl Light because it's cheap, watered down, Americanized near beer. So I never figured out how he did that, but he would get kind of mean and angry when he did this and seemed like kind of a mean drunk. And my dad and him, they had lots of big farm equipments and potential weapons and guns down there. And I was always afraid someone was going to get hurt, or maybe me or Tom or my dad or grandma. I never really liked people fighting, but whenever they would argue, of course, that's another intuitive thing. Something is definitely wrong there and probably shouldn't be happening. And it kind of just continued over the years. You can kind of get into a lot of different aspects of life, what it affects. I kind of told this story last week. When I was in high school, I had just finished my freshman year in high school, and this was the summer of 1993, which was a pretty big summer. I was learning how to drive and going to driver's ed and doing appointments for driving school and all that. And I actually got to drive along with an old girlfriend one time, which was a blast. I don't know why we didn't become something more. Just thinking about that now. And the other thing about that summer too is I was only 15, so I wasn't quite old enough legally to have a minimum wage job yet, so I didn't really work that summer. But I tell this story. One morning I was listening to my favorite morning radio show, which was also a call-in show. I never really called in for it, but they came on with this strange news story about how certain people were promoting changing terms or changing the language that we're using in this country. And it was basically bringing politically correct speech into the mainstream. And that was the first summer that Bill Clinton was in office. And so that speech had been around before, but I always associate that language, which we still have today and is continually growing and kind of sticking its tentacles into everything else in the world. I think he and his administration brought that into the mainstream. And at first it was really funny, like, why are they doing this? Why are they, for instance, changing the term pet, like your cat or your dog? Why are they changing it to non-human companion? That makes absolutely no sense. And it was actually kind of funny. We wanted to make fun of it at the time. But if your cat or your dog, if you're kind to them, I don't think they really give a shit what you call them. In fact, it even reminds me of the movie The Jerk with Steve Martin, where he finds a stray dog that warns him about fire at the hotel, and turns out there's no fire. And a Chinese guy comes over and says, "Don't call that dog Lifesaver, call him Shithead." And they call him Shithead the rest of the movie. And the dog didn't care. I mean, he had a home and a loving owner and food and everything. It was just stuff like that. It actually happened a lot during the 90s. I was like, what are we doing on this and other things, and the direction we're moving? And now we're in some other weird place. It's just hard to fathom 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's just really crazy. Just a couple other quick stories here. Hopefully I'm making a good point here. Certainly welcome your questions and everything. Intuition would have been really helpful in dating girls and meeting girls. Obviously some guidance from Dad and other male role models probably would have been pretty good too. Occasionally people are wrong with intuition, including the women. I was in dental school one time and studying with another guy and another girl. And the girl there was kind of a know-it-all. And this other girl came over and she was real kind to me. I can't remember what she was asking or whatever, but the girl at the table was saying, after the other girl left, who walked up to the table, was saying, like, "Oh, it's so obvious that she likes you, Frank, and you need to ask her out," or that. And I did eventually ask her out. I don't remember how soon it was, but I asked her out, and then she said no and said she already had a boyfriend. That was always a big thing. When girls say that, guys will usually take it literally, and I don't normally rock the boat or anything. I'll just go on to the next person. I'm not trying to interrupt anybody's relationship there. And then the last real story is from going to church one year. We went out to meet the family for Christmas, and we went to church one evening, not too long before Christmas. And I don't really want to say what kind of church it was or where we were or anything. I don't want to ruffle any feathers, but it was a really weird situation. Let's just call him the pastor. We do all the stuff leading up to his message, and then he gives his message, and then we do a few things afterwards. And then after that, he decides to give a closing message that is totally different. Some of the details, of course, are vague on all these things, but he proceeds to say somehow that women are much smarter than men because of their intuition. He never uses the term intuition or gut feeling, but the damn guy goes on for, seems like 10 or 15 minutes on this, and my wife and other female relatives are getting big heads from this, and I just want to kind of go over there and tell him to knock it off. It made me so mad. And I told them afterwards, of course, what I just told you. I said, we all have intuitions and we all should use them. They're all developed in some greater or lesser ways. Women's are very good, very developed, and very much in use. Men should use theirs more. And I tried to explain that. He just gave them a big head with his craziness. I mean, it was a very rogue message. I never really seen that before. It really pissed me off. Just to elevate the women on that and then put down the men. It was terrible. But anyway, in conclusion to this segment, I would just say, I hope you have a good intuition. Sometimes experience helps develop it, and that you'll use it a lot, especially in this coming year with another presidential election and other things, concerns about the direction of the country. You know, be careful what you hear in the media as well, particularly social media. That's where your gut can really come in and help you. So anyway, that's my first little segment. I'm going to do a review of Priscilla's appearance on Starsky and Hutch right after this. All right, welcome back. This week's review, of course, is about the classic plainclothes TV detective series, the late 70s, called Starsky and Hutch. You've probably heard about it. I think overall it was okay. It definitely seems to carry a fair amount of love and nostalgia by a lot of people. Don't think I quite understand why exactly, but like I said, it's a slice of America in the late 70s, and it's not really a bad show because of that. But let me give you a little background to the show, like I always do here. It was created by a guy named William Blinn, but it was done by Aaron Spelling, particularly Spelling Goldberg Productions. If you see Spelling's name, usually you see a guy named Leonard Goldberg next to it, or a guy named Douglas S. Kramer. The last guy worked on the original Star Trek series. And it started with a 72-minute pilot in April of 1975 and went for 4 seasons to August of 1979. That was 92 episodes of 50 minutes each. And they wound up going into syndicated reruns. Eventually there was a 2003 video game followed by a 2004 theatrical release, which starred Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn. The original stars were Paul Michael Glaser, who played Dave Starsky, and then David Soul, who played Ken Hutchinson, or Hutch as they call him. Southern California, we believe police detectives, plainclothes guys. They actually worked out of a town called Bay City, which is fictional, and it almost sounds more like San Francisco, but it was really LA area, particularly filmed in the little community of San Pedro there. The police station that was filmed there is actually the city hall today. And they had the radio call on the CB, or police radio, was Zebra 3. And in order to train Glazer and Soul, they hung out with actual New York City police detectives for a little while and helped them train them, if you could say. But those New York City police detectives later sued Aaron Spelling for like $10,000 each. I don't know what was going on there, but one of the other things that stood out about the series had a 2-door Ford Gran Torino. It was actually Starsky's. Bright red with a white vector line on each side, something that Glazer later called the Red Tomato. And Hutch actually had a car of his own that we didn't see quite as much in the show, a 73 Ford Galaxy 500 that sometimes had a glitch where the horn would go off if you opened the driver's side door, and there was a lot of clutter in the back, so they couldn't really take any bad guys back to jail. Paul Michael Glaser and David Soul, they both have a number of acting credits. People may forget what they were in before and after this show. Paul Michael Glaser had a role in Fiddler on the Roof, as well as some other things, and did a lot of directing later on. David Soul was in some things like the original Star Trek series, one of those episodes. It was an All in the Family. Did some other things later, like Murder, She Wrote. Of course, David Soul was also one of the trio of bad cops in Magnum Force that I keep bringing up here. That also starred Tim Matheson and Robert Urich, who always makes his name into this show for some reason. And one last thing, the show was always kind of a buddy-buddy show where Starsky and Hutch were kind of like brothers, and they occasionally embraced and stuff. I don't think it was really homoerotic or anything like that, but it was kind of lighter-hearted in that regard. The first 2 seasons, though, it was kind of violent, and more violent than later years anyway, deeper and darker, more in line with detective work. And then, of course, it lightened up. In the following seasons, Paul Michael Glaser was always wanting more money, according to what I read. There was a rumor that they may come out with a new TV series, Starsky and Hutch, which, as the trend goes these days, may star 2 women. But a lot of times these reboots, they have ideas for them, but sometimes they don't materialize. But in case you see that pretty soon, you may have heard it here first. Oh, and I should say, Dave Starsky, of course, that's Paul Michael Glaser. He was the bigger, dark-haired guy, had more of a temper, had been in the U.S. Army, probably in Vietnam. And then, of course, Hutch, played by David Soul, was a smaller, blonde-haired guy, more even-tempered, not really too emotional. When David Soul, he's also known as a singer. I think I heard maybe one of his songs. I couldn't tell you what it was. Paul Michael Glaser, on the other hand, did some directing as well, so that was kind of his other career path. In this episode, I think it was pretty well written. Priscilla looks absolutely gorgeous and ravishing in this. She's very youthful and has a very tremendous glow to her. I think the writing in this particular episode was very advanced, and you have to be really paying close attention or watch it a couple of times to really know what was going on. But what happens is she's waiting at a bus station and with her suitcase and plans to travel somewhere. And this guy gets out of a car, also carrying a suitcase, and then this car butts in with a mobster on board and shoots this guy who had this other suitcase. And turns out that he had $1 million and the mobsters took the money from him, and then he died. And throughout the show, we wonder if Priscilla is an innocent witness to what was going on here, or if she was a willing or unwilling accomplice with this guy. And I tend to think as the show went on, she was actually unwilling accomplice. I mean, she tried to tell the truth to everybody involved and got her facts wrong, and that's where people got thrown off. She goes to the police station. I try not to give too many details, I know, to let you watch the show on your own. But they ask her some initial questions, and they decide, well, she's a witness. She needs police protection. They decide to put her up at a nice hotel at first. But then she comes over to Hutch's apartment, and he's smitten with her. And then, without her staying there very long, she winds up going to Starsky's apartment, and he's smitten with her as well. Winds up hiding the money in Starsky's apartment while she goes back to the hotel. Then they go meet her for breakfast the next morning. The bad guys ransack her hotel, and she eventually escapes the police station again, and then they kidnap her. She gets the names of the cops mixed up, which I probably would too. I mean, I've always been confused about who Starsky is and who Hutch is, but because she mistakenly told him, no, the money's in Hutch's apartment, and it's not. He gets his apartment all torn up, and then it turns out it's at Starsky's apartment. And then eventually there's a meeting in the middle of nowhere, and where supposedly Starsky supposedly exchanges money for both Hutch and for Lisa. What was her last name on this here? Lisa Kendricks, I think it was. But and he had the suitcase supposedly with money handcuffed to him, and it was all a big ruse and everything. But anyway, they ultimately get the bad guys, but Lisa runs away, and we find out at the end the money, apparently it was put in her suitcase by mistake by this guy. The guy who got shot at the beginning was someone she was apparently living with. And I don't know if she was really attached to him or why she wasn't sad that he died. But she turned in that money and got a 5% reward, which I think was about $50,000. And then she went to the airport and went to North Africa, which is where that guy was going to head anyway. It's funny at the end, as like I said, a lot of these shows have these lighthearted endings. You see Starsky and Hutch see the proof that she gets this reward check, and she had a carry-on there that just has clothes in it, and they're searching through her underwear and everything, and they're embarrassed because these other women are looking at them, and it's really funny as Lisa winds up making her flight, but apparently is going to be back for the trial for these two mobsters there. Anyway, the point is, Priscilla did a really good job playing this character because you really don't know whether she was a good guy or a bad guy throughout the movie. I think it turns out that she was really a good guy and was innocent witness and didn't really know what all was going on. And so that's why I think the writing and acting on this show was really good. I would recommend checking it out. The name of the episode is called Foxy Lady, from March 1st of 1978. Hopefully I didn't spoil it too much for you, but that was just the way things were written back then and acted back then. I thought it was overall really good. So I'll give the show and Priscilla both an A on this. I also wanted to add that I'm always curious about these Aaron Spelling shows. I don't know if Glazer or Soul was ever on the Love Boat. Just because you were on a different Aaron Spelling show doesn't mean that you got invited to be on the Love Boat. That's what I think about during my days. I never saw credit for either of them on the Love Boat. A few years after this, William Shatner starred in T.J. Hooker. I don't think he or Zmed were ever on the Love Boat. I thought it would be great if Shatner was. And then you think about Ricardo Montalban playing Mr. Rourke on Fantasy Island. I don't think he was ever on the Love Boat. Well, they had that crossover one time, though, when the Love Boat actually came to Fantasy Island, I think is what I heard. So not sure about him or Tattoo, Hervé Villechaize. Anyway, that's just the way my brain works. I'm just getting off on a tangent here. So hopefully I didn't give too much away. Hopefully I pique your interest on this as well. Oh, one thing that I do want to say before I sign off today's program. So this morning, I'm a big fan of the Adam Carolla show, and he's an inspiration to me to do this show. I have been motivated to talk about this a little bit. I'm not going to talk about it for long, but he's been on this kind of campaign or crusade. You all know the red light, left turn arrows that exist in Texas, and I guess a lot of other places now. This is against the law in most places, including Texas. When you get a solid red left turn arrow, he feels that you should treat that as a right turn on red, where you stop at the red light, look to see that nothing's coming, and then you go ahead and go. And I tend to think not only because it's illegal, but from a historical perspective. We never had red left turn arrows in Texas until maybe the early 2000s, possibly the late 90s. And before that, you'd go up to a left turn lane and it was a solid red light. You couldn't turn, you couldn't do anything at all. This was after I was in driving school, right? It really took me aback when they started putting those red left turn arrows in. And I'm like, what is this? What is this crap? What is this bullshit? Because red means red. You can't go on it. And so my thought historically is that you can't go on that no matter what. And I usually agree with Adam on a lot of things, but I will tell you right here, that's one small area where I would disagree with him, just because the red left turn arrow is still relatively new in the American driving experience. And I just wanted to put my 2 cents in on that. And I hope that you will too. You know, I have a lot of different ways that you can reach me that'll be listed in the show notes, and would love to hear from you on that, as well as the other topics on this show, Starsky and Hutch and my little intuition discussion. But anyway, for now, that's going to be it for this program, and so glad that you could make it in today. I would love to see you again here next week on the party. And so this is Frank Weber signing off. The theme song is called Retro Funk by Soul Prod Music and is available on pixabay.com.